The world won't understand you. Hey, but it's okay. Said the world won't understand you, 'cause I made you in my own way. Said the world won't understand you.
Hey, what's good, everybody? Welcome to episode 18 of In a Good Way podcast. As you know, right now it's October, so Halloween is coming up. There's always a time, anybody that's involved with the spiritual already knows it's a time when they say the veil's real thin and all that. And I think I instantly felt it, like, as soon as the fall hit, which I had said too that I was going to start doing the podcast again in the fall. But, I felt like this whole shift. It was funny because, right at the end of the summer, I finally got sick after all this time, since really the whole pandemic started. I finally ended up getting a little sick. But, I'm happy for it because it feels like I needed to rest. And, I feel pretty great now. I'm still kind of recovering, but for some reason it's like I really needed to just stop and rest and everything. So with that said, I wanted to start off with this story I've told before. I want to try to be consistent during October leading up to Halloween. And this is a story I've shared before on another spiritual channel and a personal channel I had. But you know what? In the spirit of Halloween and everything, I thought I'd share it again. If you read the title, you could see it says, little ghost girl. And this story, I'll go into different things, right, about seeing spirits and all that. But this story, I think, is the first time that I can actually say I seen what people call a ghost, right? Or a spirit. I don't normally like to call them ghosts. I'd rather call them spirits. But this was really the first time that I could remember. There was something that happened once, but it was so weird. Now it makes more sense. I'll talk about it after. But, I had seen this thing that I felt like I was awake. But it was like something so weird that it didn't seem real, right? Like, I know I didn't just see that. So it was one of those things that was probably the only other time before that could have been before I seen the little girl, right? So anyways, so the story begins, to get right into it. The story begins, I had just moved into a new house, beginning my high school year, right? I was going to be a freshman. So right after I graduated from 8th grade, and then I was going to start high school. We moved into this new house. And, when we moved into this house, there was this room that, was all the way, you come in through the living room and then all the way down the hallway to the end of the house. To the backside, there was a room, right? And when we first moved in the room, the door locked from the outside, which was already weird, And I guess it ended up being that was this little girl's room. I don't know if she was in there too with a brother or it was just the little girl. I think after the neighbors ended up telling us that, I don't know if she had mental problems like autistic or, I don't think, something like that, right? Like she had some kind of, I don't know. I don't think it's called a disease, right, or nothing like that. But she had one of those, like either autism or something, right? And that's according to the neighbors. But anyways, I guess they said, they were aware of that the little girl, and I don't know if they said they would lock her in the room or something, but it was obvious the lock was on the outside, right? So, we started seeing this little girl, but for the most part, from what I could tell, it was really only me and my dad that would see her. Out of me, my two brothers, my mom, it was really only me and my dad that would see her. I'd be sitting down in the living room, and the hallway is like right there, and I would see someone just run by, right? Like or stuff like that. Like I'll be sitting down in the living room, you'll see someone run by. You know, my dad would see her. You know, it was crazy even once. Like my dad, he was gonna be late for work. You know, he would work early, and he would sleep on the couch a lot. And so I guess one day while he was sleeping on the couch, the little girl came into his dream, and she was pointing at her like a watch or something, and she was like, in Spanish, she was saying, "Se te va a hacer tarde, se te va a hacer tarde," you know, which means you're gonna be late, you're gonna be late. And my dad woke up, and boom, it was time for him to go to work. So, you know, she helped him out. She got him to work on time. And then the crazy thing was, he said about 2 weeks later that my mom was putting up these curtains in the living room, and that the curtains ended up being the same material as the dress the little girl had on in the dream, right? When she woke him up. So it was crazy. So, you know, for the most part, like me and him would see her and everything. You know, I would see her more. She never came into my dream. I would see her while I was awake, and then he saw her in the dream, and then also while he was awake. Finally, one day, this man was building like a porch outside, right? Like when you come out to the backyard, he started building a porch, right? And one day he was over there like in the backyard, and I guess we came out, like me and my dad, we came out. I think sometimes we would let him be there, and we just locked the house and we'd get home, whatever. And we got home, and so we saw that he was working on the porch. So we went out, I think, to talk to him. And he said, "Oh, where's the little girl?" Like, she was just waving to me. Like, but at the time, my brother was dating this girl that had a daughter. So he thought it was her, you know, because sometimes they'd be there, you know, my nephew, my brother's girlfriend's daughter. So he thought it was her, that she was waving hi to him, and he waved back and everything. And then my dad was like, "Don't tell him, you know, don't tell him that about the ghost, because you're not gonna want to finish the porch, you know." So it was pretty crazy. And what sucked was after, you know, at that time, you know, within years, you know, she was there for years, right? After, I think maybe, you know, I moved in, you know, my freshman year. Probably by the time I was a junior, senior in high school, I think I started getting more around like listening to Christianity, right? Because already spiritual things were happening to me. I started reading the Bible, everything. And there was this preacher that I would listen to that, you know, I really liked him. I think he's been one of the few preachers that I actually liked. He would just sit and read the Bible. He didn't have the whole show, the theatrics, nothing. It was just like, bam. He would read it. Like, he's one of the ones that taught me even how important words are, right? How words have changed throughout time. And every time they would make translations and change the words, how you would lose the meaning of the original. Like, he's the first one that I ever heard when, you know, he talked about how this whole Garden of Eden, how it was never even an apple, it was like a fig tree and all this and that. And then it made sense because later on, I think Jesus talked about the fig tree in a parable. And so everything, like, it would connect the dots better, right? So once I was watching him, and I guess people would write and ask him questions, and he talked about how, like, driving out spirits, you know, this little ritual that you would do, you know. So he actually talked about that. Like, someone asked him a question, how do you, like, make spirits leave your house? And so he said that. So I did it, right? And so that night, when I did that little ritual, I guess I must have driven out the little girl, right? Because after that, I never seen her. But it was crazy because that night after I did the ritual, I had an out-of-body experience. And I remember walking through the house, and it was crazy because I think, and I don't know who was in the living room, and like my room was all the way in the back. You know, I was actually staying in the room where, you know, where the little girl supposedly used to stay. I don't know, that made me more sense. Maybe not, because my dad would see her too, right? But it was crazy, you know. They were having a conversation. There's no way I would have been able to hear them. So after, that's how I knew I had a body experience, because I was walking through the house and I seen this little, like, brown boy. Like, it's like when I was having my out of body experience, I could see through the curtains, I could see through the walls. So there was a little boy outside the house that couldn't come in, and he was looking at me like, well, like, why'd you kick us out? Like, what? Like, it was sad. I actually felt bad when I woke up. I was like, oh wow. Like he wouldn't even come out. He was just here, I guess, but you wouldn't be able to see him. He would never come out, just the little girl. So I guess I had driven him out too when I did that whole little ritual. And I felt bad, you know, because he was stuck outside the house looking like, hey, what I do or what we do or whatever. And then I remember hearing my family, they were talking in the living room. And when I woke up, like right after I saw all that, I guess it was like a little nap or something. And I went and I was like, hey, were you guys just talking about this? And they were like, yeah. But I knew there's no way I could have made it out. It would have been like mumbled or something. There's no way I would have been able to clearly hear what they were saying all the way in the living room, you know, on the kitchen table. And I was all the way in the back room. So it would have been, you know, impossible to hear, to hear everything that they said. So that's how I knew the experience was real, right? That I really, you know, I saw the kid and all this stuff. But after that, the girl never appeared, right? I never seen her again after I did that little ritual thing. So I've always felt that, you know, I drove her out. But that was, you know, my experience. You know, and well, also, you know, if you guys have had any experience, make sure let me know in the comment section and all that. But a crazy thing about this that I'll get into real quick that I haven't talked about before, because this happened a few months ago. So, you know, I always wanted to know where I got this gift from, right? Why I started seeing spirits. Like, well, did I get it from my mom? Did I get it from my dad? Once, you know, you start, you know, not everybody, but for me, yeah, I definitely went on a whole quest, which has been throughout my whole life, right? Wanting to know exactly. Like, I barely found out stuff about, I think during the whole pandemic, I spoke to an aunt, which is the first person that told me without a doubt that my grandma had gifts, right? That my grandma would have premonitions. She would know things. You know, and she noticed even my aunt, the one that was telling me this, had the gifts as well. So it was crazy. Like, because no one ever told me that. You know, my mom, with her, it was 7 sisters and 1 uncle. And none of them ever said anything about the spiritual stuff. Barely, you know, like last year, the year before, you know, I don't know if it was in 2020, 2021. My aunt finally, we were talking on the phone. And she told me all that. She opened up about how my grandma had the gifts and everything. But also on my dad's side, you know, because like I said, only me and him were able to see this little girl. Like, not even my mom saw her, right? And so, you know, it was crazy because throughout my whole life, and I think this is a challenge, right? I don't know how it is. You guys can let me know in the comment section how it is for other spiritual people. But for me, the most opposition always came from like your own household, right? Like my house. Like my dad was always like the #1 doubter, right? Like the biggest skeptic when it came to spiritual stuff. Even though he would experience stuff, it always blew my mind that when I would share things, it would be like, or he'll always show me shows that, oh, well, look, they, you know, they were able to show that there was a logical explanation or this and that, you know? So it was always very frustrating, right, in that sense. And even though, like, it just didn't make sense. Like, think about it. Someone actually experiencing things time and time again, but then they'd be like, wow. Like, it just didn't make sense, right? So it was very frustrating for me throughout my whole life, right? From all the way from when I was, you know, in high school when things started happening all the way till now. So finally, a few months ago, we had this talk. I don't know how it came up, but it was kind of like, I finally was calm enough, you know, so I take responsibility that I was calm enough to be like, you know what? Because I've shared the story before, how when I finally asked a question, you know, if I don't know if I've shared it on one of the podcast episodes. If not, I could share it real quick. Might as well, since I got into it. So when we were talking, you know, I think I even told him that day. I was like, look, for me, when it happened, it was like, I remember I went into my room. I turned off the light. I didn't say it out loud. I thought it in my head. Because even then, right, like I said, I was around like the Christian stuff. So I think someone must have said that demons and stuff could hear you, but they can't read your mind. Only God could, or this and that. So I remember I prayed and I asked a very specific question. And the next day, I had just started this new job. It was like this warehouse work. Like we would carry automotive parts. So, we'd be pulling order 14-hour days, all this and that, Just like, manual labor, right? Lifting big old brake disc and all this stuff. And, engine parts, I think, all that stuff, right? So anyways, I went to work, and this guy that didn't even know me, he comes to me and he's like, hey, I don't want you to get all weirded out, but I had this dream and I think it was for you. And I got all excited. I was like, yeah. And he gave me the exact answer to the question I had asked. And I had said that, like, if you answer this, I'll never doubt, I'll never nothing. And I never did after that, right? So that was the thing for me. I asked a very specific question. It was, and they made sure, right? Like, they brought me the answer through this guy that didn't even know me. I just like, hey, what's up from work? He ended up being like this ex, I don't know if he was a gang member, but he had been in prison for like 8 years or something like that. He almost had a shootout with the police, and then he said that's when something spoke to him, and then he didn't, and then he ended up going to prison. That's when he got all spiritual or became a hardcore Christian or this and that. So, it was crazy. Like, they brought me someone like that, because at that time, that's when I was around. Like, I was still like in the streets and this and that. I was always responsible. I would always work, but I'd always be in the streets too and stuff like that. So, they had to bring me someone like that I would have respect for at that time in my life. And, that showed me, right? Because he changed too. See, it was someone that lived that way, and then they changed. And I think I was in the middle. I was still struggling. Like, you'll change, and then you get pulled back in, and then you change, and all that stuff, right? So they had to show me someone that had been through that. And, they brought me the answer, right? So it meant more. It wasn't just me. I'm not crazy. I didn't imagine it. Like, this guy brought me this message. So after that, I never doubted. Never. Like, to this day, right? And this was like early 20s, right? So I asked my dad. I know this is going all long, but, I might as well, since I got into that story. So I asked him, because he still never believed, right? So he felt that he hadn't been shown proof enough to believe. Like, in all his life, he's 70 something now, so in all his life he had never been shown enough proof to believe. So I asked him, I was like, well, what would it take? Like, did you ever ask, like, hey, did you ever stop and ask? I asked him that, like, did you ever stop and say, hey, if you at least show me this, I'll never doubt? And he said, no, I never actually asked that. And I said, well, what's the minimum thing that they could show you that then you would never doubt again? And he said, nothing. He's like, I'm not really interested in that. And I said, what? Then, man, you would have saved me a headache. Like, so you don't even care then. So you're never going to be shown. So why? And that goes to, like, people that are skeptics, right? Like, they're so busy looking, like, they never really stop to say, okay, if you show me this. But, to be a person of your word, that's the thing. Is like me, it's funny because I don't want to keep going into other stories, but that's just kind of the person I am, right? Like for example, when I started doing the acting stuff, right? It changed my life. And the way it happened was, there was this guy recording at the studio, and I had a session, and I was about to get my session, and then this guy was like, hey man, like, is there any way, I could just 30 minutes, I just have to do this drop for a radio station, just let me do this real quick. I was like, yeah, you know what, sure, go ahead. But in my head, I was like, oh, because I had seen that guy. He had came out on Sons of Anarchy. He had came out on this other movie. So I had seen him on TV. So I was like, all right, cool. I'm doing this guy a favor. So sure enough, when he comes out, I felt no, like, restraints about asking him, like, a question. I was like, well, I just did this dude a favor. Like, because even with music, it was hardcore. Like, there were times when, there were even artists that had some kind of recognition, and I had a session in the studio, and they'd even be like, hey, do you mind if I hang around? And I'll be like, yeah, I mind. And they'll be like, oh, it's cool, okay. Like, I would kick people out. I didn't care, like, who you were. I didn't care if you had fame, or when it came to the studio, I was always very like, hey, this is my time, this is my slot. The producer learned that. Like, I think one of the first times he had someone there and he let him be there, and then I told him, hey man, like I don't like that. Like, hey, oh man, I didn't know, sorry. And at that time I kind of didn't say nothing, but then after that it bothered me so much. Like at first I was like, I'm supposed to be used to rapping in front of people, this and that, but it wasn't that. It was just like, I didn't want him to be distracted. I didn't want nobody there that didn't need to be there. So after that I let him know. I was like, hey, I don't like that ever. Like I don't want anybody here. Like, it's business, right? Like I'm paying for the hour, whatever, studio time. Get this person out of here, right? Okay, so all that to say, so I let this guy do his little radio drop, 30 minutes, maybe less it took him. And like I said, I had seen him on movies, Sons of Anarchy, all that. So when he came out, I was like, hey man, how'd you get into the acting? I was like, if you don't mind. He's like, nah. So he showed me the first casting agency he did. And he's like, yeah, just go through them, blah, blah. So then I ran into him again in the studio, like, I don't know, maybe a month later, maybe less, maybe more. But I told him, hey man, thanks. I just want to say thank you. I went, I registered, all this stuff. And he was like, what? You're like, man, I've told probably like 100 people and you're the only person I told you one time and you went and did it. And then he's all, check it out. He's all, do this too, and boom, boom, boom. And he put me up on game with more stuff, another place to go register, this and that. So, he was blown away. And every time I would see him, he would remind me that after, we were auditioning for similar roles, for the same role or whatever. So I just kept moving up, right? Like, but he would bring that up, how, man, I told you one time and you did it. And then later I went through that where people would ask me over and over 10 times, 20 times, like, and it would get annoying. And I knew what he meant, why he was so surprised that all he had to do was tell me one time. I went and did it, and then he put me up on more game, right? So I say all that to say, even with the spiritual, that's how it's been. Like when they would tell me things, like they'll tell me and I'll listen. Not always, right? Like, because the spiritual stuff, imagine, people have a hard enough time listening in the physical sense. So imagine the spiritual where you can't see stuff. It's all faith and this and that. And I would still listen. I would listen, right? And so that's how it was when I had this conversation, with my dad and everything. And he told me, like, he never really asked. He wasn't really, there was nothing. Like, they could show him anyways. So then why did we just spend 30 years or whatever, arguing about this stuff, Like, why had we gone through all that? I never stopped. I took responsibility too, because I never actually was in a calm enough space to be like, well, what would it take? What's the problem? Like, why, to actually ask somebody, well, why are you so doubtful? What, like, I don't know if it's deeper, or it's, but it didn't need to be deep. I didn't need to find out like, oh, well, there's this trauma or nothing. It was more like, well, you don't care. Like, if someone doesn't care, well, then why would someone show them? For me, it was like, I don't know, seek and thee shall find. I don't know if that's from the Bible. I've just heard it. Maybe some philosopher said that, right? But it's like, if you're not looking for it, why would it show itself to you? Who are you? Like, I know everybody wants to feel like, oh, I'm this special person, which we all are, right? We all are. We all have our thing. We all are. But in the sense of like, like, why does something, just think about like how many people are alive, how many people pass away every day, all these things that happen, how many people, some get accomplished goals, some don't. We don't know who's the one that really chooses everything. That's why even when I started making this podcast, I knew that there were things I wanted to talk about that I didn't want to let time pass. Look at, like, right now, Coolio passed away, right? Like, this is someone, and he had just started like making videos on Instagram, I think, right? Or that's what I saw people were posting. Like, it's like everyone always feels it when their time is coming or something. Like DMX, right? He had started posting videos just like Coolio now, and then they go, and but I feel like they lived their life, right? Like, DMX really did fulfill his life's purpose. It would have been beautiful if he would have stayed around longer. He was always an inspiration. Coolio too, I hadn't really heard from him, like, his music in a long time, but he definitely had an impact on me when I was growing up. So even his passing is like, just a reminder. Like, it's always a reminder, like, hey, life is fleeting. Like, you know, tomorrow's not promised, so just do what you need to do, right? But yeah, all that to say, like, I just tied that in the story because it was it's always been crazy to me that like we were the only two that would see this little girl, but yet it's someone that's always been very doubtful about the spiritual stuff, which was always very confusing to me, you know. And you'll find that, right, in life. So I'll just end it with that, right? Like how you'll find it sometimes it's the people closest to you that'll put doubt. I think it's all part of the plan. I think, you know, now the more I've learned, you know, now that I've seen different things where it's kind of like, you know, we're the ones that decide before we come here and everything, how it's going to kind of play out. So I think some of us, you know, we decide that to have someone there. Imagine, because that's harder than anything, to have someone that either you care about or family members or this and that, like, not like in a sense, like, but it's almost like if you were in a relationship, it'd be like sleeping with the enemy. Like to be in a relationship with someone, you know, like the book of Job, when they say it's the wife was telling, oh, why don't you just curse God and die already? Like that. Like imagine, there's nothing worse than, you know, having the person there that you would think would have your back the most being the most doubtful. So it's kind of like that, right? Like when you have family members that, you know, that's the most troubling thing, right? Or when you're trying to accomplish something, you know. But especially with the spiritual, like you know, I could keep going on. You know, I've met people like that I've been able to talk to, and they broke down crying because, you know, they didn't have people around them that would support them in their spiritual walk, you know, that would act like they were crazy or look at them like they're crazy and tell them literally like, you're crazy, you with your spiritual stuff and this and that. So yeah, I just wanted to share that story. I know I went off into something else, you know, but you know, I wanted to share that story about the little girl. Hey, what's good, everybody? So that was pretty crazy. The camera got too hot. That happened last time, but I guess perfect timing, right, as I was ending it. So I just wanted to say goodbye properly, or close this down properly. So thank you all for tuning in. You know, if you like the video, share, subscribe. You know, let me know in the comments if you guys have had similar experiences. And yeah, thanks for watching. All right, peace.
I said, don't worry. No, no, no. I said, don't worry. You ain't got to do this alone. I said, don't worry. You don't got to do this alone. I seen this man walking down the street. You know that place where we all meet. I asked him why the frown. He told me I've been down. Well, maybe we can work to turn this around, yeah. Cause this life gets...
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, sometimes you just feeling it, you know what I'm saying? You just feeling it. And I wanna feel this way forever.